Welcome to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center Curator's Corner. My name is Thorin Tritter. I am the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center located in Glen Cove, New York. Oops, I see somebody sending a chat out there. Oh, nice to hear from you, Diana. This program is made possible, I need to say, in part with funding from Humanities New York and the National Endowment for the Humanities. But I also need to add that any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Two other comments before I start. First, I want to emphasize our building is open, so I hope that you will be inspired either through this program or through earlier programs to come and see our exhibition and see the objects and images that I've been speaking about in our Curator's Corner. Come and see them in person in our building. And we are also restarting guided tours. So if you're interested in arranging a guided tour, you need to arrange that in advance, but give us a call and we will set that up for you. And the second thing I always want to mention is that if you've got questions that come up during my presentation, I hope that you will use the Q&A feature of Zoom. Type those in. I'll either respond at that moment or at the end of the program. I'll definitely make time to look at those. Okay, so today, if I can get our screen moving here. Today, I want to talk about this photograph that stands in our 5th gallery and was taken during the D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944, 77 years ago this week. Here you see the caption, "We provide 150,000 US and British troops invade Normandy, France, bringing hope to European Jews. Another year passes before the war ends." I'm not sure D-Day gets as much attention as I believe it deserves. I know there was a lot of attention back in 2014 for the 70th anniversary of D-Day, and again in 2019 for the 75th anniversary, but in general, I think we turn attention to other events when we talk about the war. But there's little doubt that the D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944 was one of the most important military operations for the Western Allies and crucial to the eventual winning of the war. Officially known as Operation Overlord, the D-Day landing was the largest amphibious invasion in history, deploying, as our caption says, more than 150,000 Allied troops on air, land, and sea. And it was more than just a naval invasion. On the night of June 5th, 23,000 US and British paratroopers landed in France behind the German defensive line, either by parachute or glider. If you've seen, I love this film, if you've seen the classic World War II film, The Longest Day, with John Wayne, Henry Fonda, Robert Mitchum, and a host of other famous actors, you may have some sense of the scale. If you haven't seen the movie, I recommend it. It's all about this massive invasion and the preparation and the way it was implemented. In hindsight, we know that D-Day marked the beginning of the end of German rule in France. By the end of June, more than 850,000 US, British, and Canadian troops had come ashore on the beaches of Normandy. So it starts on June 6th, but by the end of June, 850,000 troops had come on. 2.5 months later, August 25th, the Allies get from Normandy and they liberate Paris. And then less than a year after the Normandy invasion, on May 7th, 1945, the Germans surrender. So less than a year from the time of the invasion, we get to the end of the war with Germany. But as important as D-Day was to the Allied victory, in hindsight, we can also see that it came too late to prevent the Holocaust. And I'm going to come back to that, so keep that in mind. But let me go back and talk about our photograph, what it shows, and then go on to talk about some of the larger implications. Here's an enhanced color view of our photograph that shows a bit more detail. The vehicle, the boat that we see there is a Higgins boat, or an LCVP, for landing craft vehicle personnel. The boat was designed by a guy named Andrew Higgins, who founded a shipbuilding company in New Orleans that grew to be one of the largest shipbuilding companies in the country and produced more than 20,000 boats during World War II. The Higgins boat itself, pretty straightforward, about 36 feet long, 10 feet wide, and could carry a platoon of 36 or 40 men into shallow waters, allowing them to exit out the front onto the beach. Here's a picture of a fully loaded Higgins boat, perhaps actually the same boat as the one in our picture. This is part of a series of photographs that was taken during the D-Day landing, and I think this may well be our same photograph just a few minutes earlier as they're heading towards the beach. Note the plastic bags wrapped around the rifles to keep them from getting wet during the landing. Back to our photograph. You know, if we were in person, I'd be asking you to tell me about it. And maybe I could ask you to type some things into the chat window. What are things you notice about this photograph or things you notice in this photograph? If you can, let me make sure that we can get this. Yeah, so if you can type that into the chat window, that way other people will be able to see it too. And let's see what you notice about the image that we show. I've got some things, of course, that I wanted to talk about, but I'm guessing they're the same things that you see. I don't have any glass ball here, crystal ball to see anything different than you. So type those things in, type what strikes you into the chat window. Somebody's mentioning that it's dark and the beach is clouded in fog, no seats. Somebody's asking about who took the pictures. I believe this was part of some of the military's own photographers who went to capture photos during the invasion, although the information was maintained very secretly. So what I see is obviously the men have exited out our boat, this Higgins boat. They're walking toward the beach. It looks like the boat has had to land a pretty fair distance from the water, from the shore, and it looks like that's because there's some kind of sandbar, because you see the men who've just gotten out, they're standing pretty high up in the water, and yet further in towards the beach, the men have gotten down so the water is much deeper. Somebody's pointing out that you can see there's more than one boat. There's men unloading to the right here. So this was a massive wave of really thousands of men onto the shore as quickly as possible. You can see the morning fog. Maybe that's fog. Maybe it's shrouded from the artillery barrage that the Allies used to kind of soften up the beaches to try and destroy any of the emplacements of the Nazis that were there, try and prepare for the invasion, maybe from the Nazis' own attacks that are going on or firings that are going on. So, but there's certainly a haze. This could be morning fog, though 6:30 in the morning was the initial landing, so very early. The beach in the distance in our photograph is one of the 5 beaches that were targeted by the Normandy invasion. The one in our photograph is the Omaha beach. But you see here the 5 different beaches, the 5 different landing areas. The Nazis prepared various defenses on the beach, and I think you can see that in our photograph in the distance is some of the stuff that's been put there to get in the way. I have another view that gives you some sense. There are mines of various types that the Nazis placed on the ground. There's barbed wire, machine gun nests, artillery casements, and these cross-shaped barriers that are often referred to as hedgehogs that were placed to prevent ships from getting onto the beach or to get in the way of tanks that were going to be loaded onto the beach. If you've seen the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan, I think you have a good sense of how horrific the landings were as the Allied forces broached what was labeled the Atlantic Wall, which the Nazis had built to defend against the expected attack. 3,000 miles of defended coastline. As that scale of the Nazi defense suggests, one thing the Allies had in their advantage or in their favor was the range of places that their attack could come, which forced the Nazis to build and fortify along this massive coastline. The Allies actively worked to hide the fact that they would land in Normandy. Indeed, it was one of the great secrets of World War II. As you may know, the Allies created a fake army with inflatable tanks so when they were seen from the air, they would seem like there was a group of tanks preparing for an invasion somewhere other than Normandy. They made up radio traffic, dummy landing crafts, all to confuse the Nazis about where the Allied landing on the mainland of Europe was going to come. Called Operation Fortitude, this sought to make the Nazis expect the attack at the narrowest part of the English Channel, at Calais, when in actuality, the attack was coming at Normandy, where the channel is far wider. And impressively, Operation Fortitude and the Allied deception worked very well. The Nazi commander along the French coast was Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who'd proved himself as a tank commander in North Africa and in the attacks in France and Belgium in 1940. And Rommel, along with his other advisors, only moved slowly to reinforce the defense in Normandy, even after the invasion started, because they held on to the belief that the real attack was gonna come at Calais. Despite that advantage, the Germans contained the Allied troops in the slowly expanding beachhead for 6 weeks after the landing. And the landings on Omaha Beach in particular, where the US 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions, that was where it was particularly difficult, particularly well defended by the Nazis. Stiff German resistance caused over 3,000 casualties at Omaha Beach before the Allied troops could establish their positions by the end of that first day. And overall, on D-Day itself, Allied troops suffered more than 10,000 casualties, and German defenders lost a slightly smaller number, about somewhere between 5,000 and 9,000 men. The military goal on D-Day was not only to get Allied forces onto the mainland of Europe, but to drive inland. A distance of around 9 miles was the plan, to link up those 5 beachheads into one secure area. While they succeeded in landing 11 divisions, the Allies failed initially in that goal to drive inland and link those beachheads. Finally, it took until June 11th, after 5 days of fighting, before the Allies overcame the German resistance and united that beachhead into one large secure space. And it would take until July, another 6 weeks later, that the Allies troops captured the city of Saint-Lô and broke out of Normandy to really start pouring into the main body of France. I want to show you a series of maps where about how the Allies forces spread outward from Normandy in the weeks after June 6th of 1944. Here's the map that shows where Allies forces stood on July 27th, a couple of days after Saint-Lô had been taken and that opened the door to the west, the main part of France. 3 days later, the map shows most of Normandy had been captured by that date. And by August 26th, oops, I can't see exactly what I put here. Oh, there we go. By August 26th, let's see if I can get that map up. So August 14th. Oh, okay. By the middle of August, troops had started to push towards Paris, the line kind of swinging south and to the east from the end of the line. And by August 26th, the Allies had liberated Paris, and indeed their line had pushed further south and further east from Paris. And just to give you a point of reference, this is Saint-Lô back over there. So a large mass of territory had really been covered. The point I want to convey by these maps is just the speed of the Allied attack across France and how quickly they moved out from Normandy and really made a significant impact in the war. Of course, tied to the success after June of 1944 was the long delay before getting to the D-Day invasion. You'll remember that the Nazis declared war on the United States in the wake of America declaring war on the Japanese after the attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. It took almost a full year, till November of 1942, before American forces were involved in any major action in the area around Europe and North Africa with the North African invasion. And then it was a year later, September of 1943, before American forces actually got onto the main continent of Europe with the attack through the south from Italy. But neither of those invasions, neither into North Africa nor into Italy, put direct pressure on the Germans. And while the Americans slowly pushed up from the edges, it was the Red Army of the Soviet Union, our ally, that was fighting against the strength of the German Wehrmacht in the east. And here you see a map from November of 1943, where you can see the American invasion of Italy had happened, and there's American efforts or Allied coming in from the south there. But you can also see the much larger Eastern Front where the Red Army was fighting. Indeed, the Soviet Union called on FDR to attack France and force Germany into a two-front war from very early in 1942. They saw the American unwillingness to open a second front as America's interest to weaken the Soviet Union as they weakened Germany, and to leave America in a more dominant position after the war. But finally, with the D-Day invasion, America did open that second front and force Germany to fight a two-front war with the Soviets on the east and the Allies and American and British on the west. Now, I've been talking a bit about how things proceeded after D-Day, but I also wanted to talk about how people learned of the invasion. Obviously, everyone in Normandy quickly learned that the war had taken a dramatic turn as the Allies started to land on their beaches. But actually, the Allies were eager to get the word out. Once the secret of the attack had passed, once the actual attack had happened, the Allies wanted as many people in Europe to know, particularly those with anti-German leanings, that the Americans were on their way. So by noon on June 6th, the BBC was broadcasting over the radio about the landing in northern France. And I want to show you a transcript of that BBC recording and play an audio clip of that first radio broadcast that was heard on radios all over Europe. You may need to turn up your audio a little bit, but here is what the BBC reported.
This is the BBC Home Service. Here is a special bulletin read by John Snow. D-Day has come. Early this morning, the Allies began the assault on the northwestern face of Hitler's European fortress. The first official news came just after 9:30, when Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force, usually called SHAPE from its initials, issued Communique Number 1. This said, under the command of General Eisenhower, Allied naval forces, supported by strong air forces, began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France. It was announced a little later that General Montgomery is in command of the army group carrying out the assault. This army group includes British, Canadian, and United States forces. The Allied Commander-in-Chief, General Eisenhower, has issued an order of the day addressed to each individual of the Allied Expeditionary Force. In it, he said, "Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory."
Obviously, the radio broadcast went on longer, but you get a sense of it there. D-Day has come. Those were the words that many of the Jews in Europe had been waiting to hear. Anne Frank wrote about hearing that very broadcast in her diary. "This is D-Day," the BBC announced at 12, she wrote. "This is the day. The invasion has begun. Is this really the beginning of the long-awaited liberation? The liberation we've talked so much about, which still seems too good, too much of a fairy tale ever to come true? Will this year, 1944, bring us victory? We don't know yet, but where there's hope, there's life. It fills us with fresh courage and makes us strong again." I think that's a sentiment that was shared by many. And it was certainly not just Jews hiding in the Netherlands, like Anne Frank, who heard the BBC broadcast. Jacques Moalik, a 21-year-old prisoner in Buchenwald, who'd been captured after fighting for the French resistance, later recalled a day when his work group came back. It was about 30 Frenchmen. They came back to the camp after their work detail. And as they passed through the entrance into Buchenwald, another Frenchman approached him with a smiling face and said to him in a whisper, he said, "They have landed. It's official. The Germans have confirmed it." Apparently, loudspeakers in Buchenwald that regularly were used to project orders from the SS were also used a couple of times a day to share statements from the Wehrmacht's top command. And on that day at 12:30, an anonymous voice had come over the radio, come over the speakers in Buchenwald, and announced that the Anglo-Americans have attempted to get a foothold in Normandy and that counterattacks were underway. The voice also apparently cited the names of several French cities, including Saint-Lô and Caen, were familiar to the French prisoners. Jacques then recalled immediately, despite the instruction to keep calm, the same refrain issued from everyone's lips: "We'll be home by Christmas." He also said those who were doubters were called defeatists. In other concentration camps in Germany and Poland, the information filtered to prisoners through various clandestine and dangerous channels. In some camps in Nazi-occupied Poland, for example, prisoners managed to build makeshift radios or steal radios from the various storage warehouses, and they secretly listened to BBC updates and heard the news on June 6th. At the Dora concentration camp, where the V2 missiles were made, 3 French and Czech inmates employed in the camp clinic managed to hear the BBC report as they listened to some SS officers hearing the news broadcast. They then spread the word among the other inmates. And at Dachau, prisoners working in the officers' mess learned of the landing as SS officers ate their lunch. And like in Dora, those prisoners then spread the word throughout the camp. We have similar reports from other concentration camps, and almost all include 2 common responses. After hearing the news, whether from a radio or from another prisoner, most people reported a feeling of relief, like Anne Frank cited, and a sense that the end of the war was coming. But the second response was a caution about showing any response, showing any happiness, as there was awareness that the Nazis might take retribution. And a third response that might have figured in for many was a recognition that events in France might take some time before they filtered all the way over to Poland or Germany. The opening of the second front against Germany was a good sign for many, but it hardly meant the end of the war was coming quickly. It meant a reason for hope, but there were still months of hardship and terror to survive. And this takes me to the penultimate point I wanted to make about D-Day, which is that while it was vital to the eventual Allied victory, it came too late to save the lives of most of the victims of the Holocaust. On January 20th, there's a crucial window here where the majority of victims of the Holocaust were killed, and it was between January of 42 and May of 1943. On January 20th, 1942, the date of the Wannsee Conference in Berlin, 80% of the Jews who would die in the Holocaust were still alive. January of 42. 16 months later, by May of 1943, 80% of the Jews who would be killed in the Holocaust were dead. While Jews would continue to die right up until the end of the war, by D-Day, the Nazis had already killed more than 5 million Jews. These are haunting statistics. They really, they're in my mind all the time when I think about the timeline of the Holocaust. They highlight the fact, at least in hindsight, that there was a relatively narrow window when actions by the Allies could well have saved the lives of millions. And it was in that period, January 42 to May 43. And by June of 1944, that window had closed. By then, it was the advances by the Red Army in the East that had already put pressure on the Nazis, making them consider shutting down their killing centers. Only 6 weeks after the D-Day landing, before the Americans had even reached Paris, Russian forces reached Majdanek, the first of the 6 killing centers to be liberated. And while it's certainly true that the opening of the second front by the US and British forces in France stretched the Wehrmacht's resources, it's also true that it was the advance by the Red Army in the East, and not the forces that landed on D-Day, that led Himmler to order the halt of gassing operations on November 1st, 1944, and 25 days later, to order the destruction of the gas chamber and crematorium at Auschwitz. Sadly, as the Allied forces waded ashore In Normandy, the last large community of Jews in occupied Europe, the Jews of Hungary, were being deported and murdered. In the 54 days between May 15th and July 8th of 1944, when the Allied troops were fighting their way through the hedgerows of Normandy, the Nazis deported 437,000 Hungarian Jews to Nazi killing centers. Most were sent to Auschwitz, where the vast majority were killed in gas chambers. Indeed, as the D-Day invasion was planned and enacted in May and June of 1944, Auschwitz began its busiest months of operations, with 10,000 Hungarian Jews being gassed each day. And you see here one of the infamous images from the so-called Auschwitz album, where photographs were taken during that Hungarian deportation as those Hungarian Jews arrived at Auschwitz. Before I end, let me raise one last point. And that is a warning about the way we look back at history with the knowledge that we have today. In some cases, of course, our current knowledge makes us understand the past more clearly because we know the speed of the Allied advance through France after D-Day, and we know the surrender of Germany came on May 7th, 1945. We can look back and see D-Day as this significant turning point. However, we also need to try to place ourselves into the mindset of those living at the time. As Allied military planners gathered in the spring of 1944, there was no way that they could know that the D-Day landing would assure an Allied victory. There was no guarantee that America and the Allies were going to win the war. And if the war had gone on longer, or if the Allies had lost, the Nazi wave of murder would certainly have been far larger. In the meeting at Wannsee in January of 1942, the Nazi tabulation that showed the goal for their final solution was not the murder of 6 million Jews. The goal was to murder 11 million Jews. And you see here that tabulation. While we may look back and wish that the Allies had done something sooner to stop the murder of the 6 million, we should also recognize that the Allies prevented the potential killing of another 5 million Jews who were in the Nazi crosshairs. So D-Day did not prevent the Holocaust, but it did help to bring an end to the Holocaust. And for that, for sure, we should be grateful. Let me close with a special word of thanks to the US veterans who were part of the D-Day landing, or part of the fight during World War II. We certainly at HMTC are proud to include this photograph of D-Day in our gallery and to recall their service. I'm going to stop there. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this an interesting program. If you have questions, please type them in the Q&A box and I'll do what I can to answer them. Let me take a moment to remind you of some of our other upcoming programs. Tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock, we're holding a program with Saul Dreyer and Todd Lending. Saul Dreyer is the man behind the documentary film, if you've seen it, Saul and Ruby's Holocaust Survivor Band, a film actually that's Todd Lending created. We'll be showing some clips from the film and then having Saul and Todd talk to us about that film and about the effort that the whole project to create this band and the way it changed Saul's life after, or in these last few years of his life. He's still alive. He's going to be joining us. I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. He's a dynamic man. And then on Sunday, June 13th, 6 p.m., we are hosting the next program in our Sunday with Survivors series, this time with Renee Zurov, who's going to be talking about her experiences in pre-war Poland and how she survived the Holocaust. And one more to mention, next Tuesday, June 15th at 6 p.m., I'll be talking with the author Ava Moremi about her highly acclaimed book, Hidden Recipes, which traces her parents' struggle to survive during the Holocaust and the role of recipes, secret recipes, that her mother kept and that helped to give her the courage to continue to fight on. I hope you'll join me for those presentations, and you can find more details on our website at www.hmtcli.org and click on the Events tab. Okay, let me take a look. I see a couple of questions coming in here. Thanks very much. Did the Soviets know about the Allies' D-Day invasion plans? Yes, they certainly did know about it, but there was not all the details. There was a great deal of secrecy and not letting anybody know the details before it was going to happen. they were aware that there was going to be a landing. I don't think there was much attention at the details of it, though. To what extent was saving Jews part of the motivation for the D-Day invasion? I think you know the answer to that, Frank. That was not the goal. The goal was to win the war. FDR always said that their goal, their objective was to win the war. And that's why he didn't particularly advise or support, and many of the military leaders did not advise bombing of the rail lines to Auschwitz or other places. They said, we need to focus on winning the war. The quicker we win the war, the quicker we end the Nazis' anti-Semitic murder. So the goal was not to save Jews. The goal was to win the war. Why did the Nazis divert needed resources for the war effort into killing and deporting Jews? You know, this is just an amazing and horrific part of World War II, is we know that as the Nazis lost ground in 1944 and through 1945, you might have thought they would channel their resources into better defense or more military, but instead we know that they ramped up the murder of Jews and ramped up the killing. And even in the last months of the war, that they were expending energy and resources, trains, moving personnel to bring these prisoners from the further reaches of occupied Germany or occupied Europe. They were bringing them more central. They were spending effort and time doing that. I've heard various explanations about this. One is that the officers or the military personnel involved in the camps realized that they would likely be pulled aside and go and serve on the front line. And so they wanted to look on paper like they were working extra hard and being more diligent and could show more success as a way to prevent themselves from being taken out of the camps and sent to military duty on the front lines. And I think Hitler and some of the other top generals and top leaders of the Nazis, their view was, even if they were going to fail at the war and fail at creating this 1,000-year Reich, they hoped that their lasting legacy would be to murder the Jews of Europe. And they came to believe that they could fail at the war, but they would succeed at that more gruesome task. Just a kind of deranged perspective. So those are my thoughts about those questions. Thanks very much for tuning in. I hope I'll see you at some other programs soon, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.